Show presents Scratch Track,
the podcast where we debate which track to scratch off some of the most known and unknown albums of all time.
We live in an era of singles.
This is an album.
People no longer listen to an album for the work it truly is.
It kind of defines a band.
It's just not something that people relate to nowadays.
We've all gotten the dreaded.
It started out as a game.
Which track on the album would you scratch out if you had to? Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of the Scratch a Track podcast presented by The Dude and Grim Show. I'm The Dude.
And I'm Grim. And today we are talking about Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Before we get started, though, because we're going to get deep, this is a big album. I'm like a big album.
Huge.
So, but before we get started,
huge.
Yes, like, comment, subscribe, tell your friends, everything. You know, we'd really appreciate that. But we also kind of want to circle back a little bit, and there might be some new people here, hopefully, because we've noticed that we've been getting more subscribers lately. So I want to circle back and just let everybody know kind of what we're doing here. We basically pick an album, sometimes a classic album, sometimes a newer album, and we pick songs that not necessarily, I would say, right, Grim, that we don't. It's not that we don't like the song.
No,
or we think it's a bad song.
No, it's just
right?
We grew up with CDs, and our parents before that had records, and inevitably there'd always be a track that was scratched, and there'd be a lot of times where you'd think to yourself, "Son of a bitch! Like I love that song. Why couldn't it have happened to this other song? Because I could live without that. I'm not saying I don't like it. I could live without it.
Yeah."
So it became a game between the Duderino and myself, where we would just start throwing albums out there, and we'd pick the song we could live without. And so Scratch a
like
Track was born.
It was born. It was conceived. Went down the canal. I mean, it's not a song that we dislike. Because some people have responded and they're like, none, I wouldn't scratch any. And it's like, well, that's sorry.
I know. I probably wouldn't scratch any either. The CD scratched when I had it either, but it got scratched. So did Odelay and a lot of other good albums that I liked. And that's,
life sucks.
Yeah. Get a fucking
Thanks,
helmet.
universe.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, all right. Again, so we are talking today about the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. And we dug a little deeper in this one because there's a lot of information out there. I mean, obviously, we reference like the wiki page a lot, but there is a great documentary, classic albums, which they have, a ton of them, and you can get on Amazon Prime.
Some are a little more informative than others based on who's around to talk and comment, because many of them are old albums. This one I thought was very well done. Obviously, Brian Wilson's still with us, and he's talked a lot about it, and he did a lot of like mixing and stuff to kind of show. I don't know. I thought this one was really well done.
Yeah, it was good. It was really in depth. And then I actually read a book by this guy named Jim Fuseli. I think I'm saying that right, which you can get for like $15, and that's on Amazon or basically anywhere you get, physical book or digital book. And it just kind of talks about his experience, but he also gets really in depth about chord progressions, chord structure, and things like that. So it's not just, your run of the mill, hey, this is what happened while they recorded this song. Like he knows his shit. So it's pretty cool. And then there's also the movie Love and Mercy, which is kind of the Brian Wilson story. And that stars Paul Dano. Paul Dano, he's the younger Brian Wilson, and you may know him from movies. He was in not Eternal Sunshine, Little Miss Sunshine, and he was also in There Will Be Blood with Daniel Day-Lewis, Paul Thomas Anderson film. And there's another film that, of course, I'm forgetting right now that he's in. And then John Cusack plays kind of the older Brian Wilson. So we recommend, if you guys are fans of the Beach Boys or this album, definitely check out those extended materials if you guys want to learn some more, because it never hurts to have too much knowledge. But anyways, this album was released, their 11th studio album, actually, which is pretty wild. But that's also back in the day where it was kind of like a, they could churn albums out and they would do them really, really quickly. I feel like, but they would do that kind of Motown and stuff too. They would really put some albums out.
True.
But
and with no, I mean, I would say that at that point, a lot of limitations of the recording studio itself. You just go in, and it was basically like if you could record a good performance, you'd have a song really quickly.
That was it.
And I think so. Any band that had a repertoire of songs, you could just go like early Beatles stuff. I mean, they were so good at performing, they could just go in and spit them out,
churn them out. Yeah. Yeah.
And you weren't spending a lot of time with all this crazy post-production and effects because you had access to basically...
You didn't have a choice.
Yeah, there was reverb and slapback echo, I guess, is the best you can get.
Sure. So yeah, it was released 1966. In the US, it peaked at number 10, which was actually much lower than a lot of their previous albums because, again, this was very different work, and we'll get into that. But the stuff that they'd previously done was mostly about, I'd say, girls, and not that this isn't about girls. This album, the main theme of it is love. But most of their songs before this were about beaches, surfing, cars, the California sun, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It was, there just wasn't real depth to it. And Brian Wilson really started getting more mature and wanted to start doing some bigger stuff here. But it actually did better in the UK. It was much more well received by the critics over there. It actually got up to number 2 in the UK, which I found to be interesting. But they understood, I think, the maybe more production, emotional, artistic side, and they didn't have the preconceived notion that maybe a US audience would have.
Had to be. Well, and not to mention, I don't think it really hurt it that it was quote unquote championed by Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison as just an amazing work of art.
Ringo didn't like it?
Well, he just wasn't mentioned. I think as I remember it being told in the documentary, Wilson went over to England and played it for, I believe, the two of them. And I think McCartney's remark to God Only Knows that he thought it was the perfect song, which it's a pretty damn amazing song.
I heard that as well. Now, there was somebody else that they interviewed in the documentary, and I can't remember the guy's name, and I don't even know if he was in the Beach Boys. But I believe he was there when they listened to it. Now, I don't know if this was over in London or the Beach Boys, or not the Beach Boys, the Beatles happened to be in the US during the time. But he said, I think it was just Lennon and McCartney. They sat down and they listened to it through twice, and they were just blown away by it.
Yeah.
Because they had just, the Beatles before that, they had just previously come out with Rubber Soul. Now, to my own fault, when I compare albums, I've always compared for some reason to Pet Sounds to Sgt. Pepper. And I think I've done that because Pet Sounds is globally considered their best album, and I feel like, well, it's obviously arguable what the Beatles' best album is, but I think it would be fair to say that maybe Sgt. Pepper was their most revolutionary album.
Yeah, pretty high in the running.
So I always kind of put them in the same level, but I don't think that's necessarily fair because Sgt. Pepper didn't come out for some time after this. In fact, they put out Revolver and then Sgt. Pepper.
Well, but I think part of it is not that anyone was having a measuring contest, we'll say, or anything like that, but I think, these really great works of art would kind of inspire another. So Brian Wilson listens to Rubber Soul and this inspires him to say, I want to make the greatest album ever. Not that he wanted to copy it, but just this idea of some sort of connected theme running through the music and not just a collection of singles, which was pretty common at the time. And then after the Beatles hear that, then they think, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to make something that's even more thematic and even more, takes you to this place. Mm-hmm. I guess that's how I've always thought of it, really.
It's good to have that type of almost friendly competition. You
Yeah,
could
sure.
say it, because you're pushing each other in a way, because they were both fans of each other. It wasn't like, screw you and screw you, we're gonna outdo you or anything like that. At least as far as Brian Wilson was concerned. It's like, to me, it's kind of like when you think about big business and you think about, you have companies like Apple and Samsung and Google. Those companies in a weird way need each other, because
to drive
they're always
innovation. Absolutely.
drive innovation, and it's good for the marketplace, because if one person has a corner on the market, then they can charge whatever they want. I mean, well, Apple does anyways, but so it's, God, I hope they don't downgrade us on our podcast now. We love, this should be said, this is being recorded on an iPad and on an iMac,
Macs,
so we are fans. Okay, thanks. So anyways, well, I found it was really interesting that, and it has been documented about Brian Wilson and some of the mental issues that he had. But growing up, he was abused by his father, Murray, and physically abused, and that I believe led to his deafness in his right ear from getting hit in the head. There is a story in Jim Fuseli's book where he says it could have happened as early as 2 years old when he got whacked in the head, and which is crazy. But I think it was an ongoing thing. So I don't want to, when I looked at a lot of the other material and stuff that I read, they didn't really specifically talk about that incident. But that's what it is spoken about in the book.
I don't remember them going into such detail on the abuse. I mean, I remember them saying that their father was a very tough and difficult person, but he himself was a musician, if I'm not mistaken,
and a producer, manager.
Yeah, so that kind of, in a way, like set the direction, because in the band you got 3 or 4 brothers.
It's
Mike
three
Love
brothers,
is their
and
cousin.
Love is the cousin. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, it's interesting, because there's that they all kind of stuck together like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so there's that abuse is kind of documented a little bit, and there's some other things that, again, this is in the book, and there's some stuff I don't even want to say. It's not good, but Murray, the father, managed them for a while, and then they ended up firing him, I think just before this album or around this time, just because he was not only physically but also verbally abusive in the way he pushed them and the things that he did. But so Brian did have some issues. He would suffer from panic attacks, and there was one incident that has been referenced many times. They were, I believe, coming back from Houston to LA, or it might have been the other way, after a show, and he had a panic attack on an airplane. And they show that in the movie Love and Mercy. Like they act that scene out, and it's pretty intense. And I think part of it was because he was deaf in one ear, something wasn't right, and I think he had some it messed with his balance and equilibrium and all that. Yeah. So I'm not a doctor, but
I'll take a look at it.
Yeah, I'll take a look. Take 2 of these. Nuprin, little, yellow, different.
There it is.
There it is. So, I couldn't help myself. But so basically his panic attacks got so bad that there were times he wouldn't go on tour with them.
Well, I think by this time he had officially was done. I think it was spotty leading up to this. And by the time he was working on this album, I think they were touring for a lot of it while he was in
Japan.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were in Japan for a lot of it, and he basically sat them down. He said, "Hey, how about you guys, go on the road. You guys sing the songs, do all this stuff. I don't want to tour anymore. Let me stay in the studio. I'll work on our next albums and everything, and I'll be the behind the scenes," because he was the creative driving force in most of their other stuff anyway. So that it wasn't like that big of a deal. And interestingly enough, if you think you're Capitol Records, you're like, no, we need Brian Wilson. You got to be on tour. But they actually went along with it because they're like, well, this is great. We're going to churn out so much more material because while the band is out playing, he's working on the next album. And then it's kind of like this back and forth you're going to have. So that,
it's a constant moneymaker. But
constant.
it wasn't exactly what I think anyone thought. This whole business because of all that, I believe it was said that he also got to a point where he didn't just have to go into the studio anymore that Capitol Records like wanted him to go in. He worked it out where he could go in any of the studios around the area because maybe he liked the sound of this room or this room
for this part. Yep.
And I think that was also kind of a somewhat unprecedented move at that point.
Yeah. So also at this time is when there was kind of the psychedelic boom, I guess we could call it. And he did start experimenting and taking LSD, smoking a lot of marijuana. And that, for some people, I think is a very open, conscious, mind-opening experience. And for him, it was. I believe his first trip, he actually said that he saw God.
Yeah.
But he had also, I think, we could do a whole episode on microdosing and where we are now in this whole world of psychedelics and everything. But for someone who had a somewhat of a, I guess you could say, a shaky mental condition, prone to panic attacks and paranoia, this, I think, magnified that. And I don't think it was necessarily the best thing for him. Because also, if he's doing LSD in 1964, 1965,
that was the real
it was probably
shit.
It was the good shit, right? Like, I'm sure it was not like a small dose.
Acid, yeah.
Yeah. So,
well, and I know that as he started to, I don't know if this was post Pet Sounds or whatever, but as he started to kind of go off the rails a little bit, I guess one of the stories I heard is that somebody went over to his house and he had this nice room in the back that just had his grand piano in it. And at one point he just like filled the whole floor of it with sand.
Dude, they show that in the movie.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
And
yeah, no, it's really great.
I realize you can make a lot of money, but I mean, dude, putting a grand piano in that, I mean, you might as well light it up. Well, I'm not to say that it would totally ruin it, but ugh.
Yeah,
it makes my skin crawl just thinking about it.
Right. Well, so one of the influences too, they talk about, he was very influenced by Phil Spector.
With the Wall of Sound.
Career. Yeah. So explain, dude. I don't understand. What is the Wall of Sound? I don't like. Was that in an album or is it?
No, it's a concept. And I mean, if you listen to a lot of like Motown records or even pop at that point, you know how when you hear the instrumentation of a track, it's like it's huge. There's tons of stuff. There's horns, there's strings, there's a drum set in there. I mean, I guess it kind of is like it says it is. It's just like getting everyone in the studio to get on the same page with what they're playing, and the sound is just this enormous conglomeration of just all
wall
these
of sound.
Wall of Sound, dude. Not to be confused with The Wall.
The Wall, no,
but
no.
Yeah.
Well, he basically worked on it obsessively, it seems like, I think they said they recorded it basically over a 4-month period. It was from January through like April. And he actually had a writing partner.
I was going to bring that up because that's a really
Tony
important,
Asher.
Yeah. Who he met, who was just a guy in advertising who was writing jingles. And I think he said he met him walking down the hall and somehow they started exchanging song ideas, and
he was like, "Hey, come listen to this and check it out."
And I thought he was a really great addition to the documentary. I mean, especially having like penned a lot of those lines.
He gave a lot of good insight, especially because at that time, I mean, he was the one working closest with Brian Wilson, whereas like the band was off touring and stuff. And when they came back from Japan, it was kind of like, all right, hey, you guys, I just need you to put your vocal parts in, basically. Like, they didn't play a whole lot or do a whole lot on the album.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, you couldn't have that album without that. You couldn't have this album without those parts. No. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of like, here, by the way, I just went ahead and made this masterpiece. Can you just do these parts? Yep. And just to kind of put the icing on.
And I think, and that did create a little, some issues within the band, because a lot of them, I wouldn't say a lot of them, I think initially they were like, well, wait, this is kind of a Brian Wilson album. And it has gone back and forth a little bit. And Mike Love touches on it in the documentary, saying that he felt like it's been a little unfair. He's been a little unfairly characterized for not liking the album and not, feeling a part of it, but basically not liking. He said, look, he liked the album. He liked the songs. He liked the production of it. A lot of it was the lyrical content that he didn't, I think, fully get.
Well, and also and I know that
he wanted to have more of a hand.
And he was real critical of Brian Wilson for doing any sort of drugs. And he was like straight edge before punks invented straight edge. I mean, he seems like a real kind of, I don't know. A real curmudgeon, let's just say.
Yeah, it was good to see this, in the documentary. And I believe when I was watching it again, he's kind of talking about his love for the album. And I actually, who knows, maybe he had something in his eyes, both of them. But I could see him kind of almost tearing up a little bit, because I think he does feel like he's been a little unfairly characterized. And in the movie, I will say he is shown as, really kind of, I don't know if I'd say being against it, but he's the one who is portrayed as pushing back the most on the new direction, the new sound, and kind of Brian Wilson's he was perfectionist and almost obsessive to a point, on doing parts over and over and over again. That many would say like, we got it.
Yeah, like, and he was like, no. Well, and I think there's a lot of different accounts of how the name of it came along. And somehow I love how his account is that he named the album. So it's like, even though it's like, I feel like in a way it's like him trying to, and again, I wasn't there. I don't know. I don't claim to, but you listen to enough accounts by different sources and there starts to be a consistent theme, maybe we'll say. And it just seems like, that to me, that was like this grasp at straws of like, see, I did do something and I did want this. I
contributed.
Too. Yeah.
Well, I believe I actually did read too, though, that at one point Brian Wilson said that I think that Mike Love came up with it, and Brian Wilson I think has also said that Al came up with it too.
Oh, I thought he said that Carl.
Or maybe
Wilson
it was Carl. Maybe it was Carl. Yeah, it could have been.
Kind of weird.
I mean, so who's to say? Who's to say? But well, many do. Well, the production of this album at the time, it was over like $70,000, which was just like unheard of at that time. And I think they've calculated it to today's standards. That'd be like $500,000 or something. I mean, just to produce this album,
you have to be talking millions.
Sure. So they were in the studio for like 4 months, and they talk about the studio musicians, and I know you want to talk a little bit about the Wrecking Crew.
Absolutely.
But he would keep them there sometimes from even 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. But Wilson really respected them because he knew that they were just like the cream of the crop. And they took it very seriously as well. Like they were like, we don't exactly know what this guy is doing, but it's special
and it's interesting.
We want to be a part of it. And they didn't normally get to do shit like that. So
well, it's I mean, you think of the cost of a studio itself, right? So there's the producer, I guess in this case Brian Wilson is the producer, but you still have probably a room full of a couple engineers, people placing mics, somebody running the board, somebody probably just running the tape machine. And then you got Wilson. Then you have a room full of people who are getting paid by the hour to be there, and probably good money too, because at that point, like, people didn't make everything on fucking Ableton, so there were actual musicians who played things. So you got a room full of these people. And I mean, you could be talking, in some cases, there'd be a small orchestra there, or, and I mean, specialty stuff. There's the harp is on there. I mean, there's just, it's not just like a guy who's good at guitar. It's not a hired gun who can play a sweet guitar solo. It's like hiring an orchestra almost. Yeah. And then a rock band too.
Yeah, or like we previously we just did our American Beauty album. It's not like Jerry just met the mandolin player at a softball game and said, "Hey, you want to come down?" Like it's not that. It's like the exact whatever that is. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah. So the Wrecking Crew was primarily responsible for the instrumentation, and I mean, we could probably do a whole episode just on them. So without going too deep into it, there was I'd say more than a handful of these musicians around the LA area who were basically just like regulars in the studio when a lot of pop people would come in and just wanted to have a band record their song in whatever instrumentation. But I think Brian Wilson's approach here was much more of a composer. So he's writing parts on staff paper for people, like writing out parts, telling them, directing them as to how he wants it to sound, what he imagines. And I think his comment was using the using the studio as an instrument, where other people, the studio is merely a place to record you playing their instrument. He's using that studio and the people there as the instrument. And he's merely the composer, director, producer, everything. Yeah.
Well, and they said when they were recording, they used at the time state of the art, but 4-track and 8-track recorders. And I guess most of the backing tracks they said were recorded onto like the 4-track, and then it was dubbed down to 1-track of the 8-track machine. But I guess I would be curious your thoughts on this. They said typically he divided the instruments kind of into 3 tracks. He would do drums, percussion, and keyboard on 1 track, horns on another, and then bass, additional percussion, and guitar on a 3rd track. And is that because they would record all of those parts together? And is that how? I
think probably, and I think the timbre of the sound makes sense to go together because, like if you're recording on a single track, I wouldn't want necessarily like somebody singing background vocals and then a drum set on the same, and nowadays no one even considers this because it's not even close to,
because you have 1,000 tracks.
You have whatever you want. But back then, I mean, this was a real thing. So I would imagine it just had to do with the timbre and sort of the registers that they were in. But what I did see is that I think most of it was actually on 4-track machines, I believe.
Okay. All right.
And by the time the band came back and they were going to do the background vocals, they had everything else was already locked down to a single mono track.
Wow.
So they had already done enough of like which I think that would be hard to mix. But the interesting thing is, a lot of that mixing is solely based on the performance, because if you're recording, let's say like, I don't know, guitars, piano, like you probably have a number of mics in the room and you got to get that balance dialed in. And once you record it to that track, you're not turning a guitar up anymore. That's what it is. And that's it. So it's the whole thing is fascinating to me how incredible it sounds and how little control they had of everything in post.
Well, it's so, to me, the thing that I really notice about this album is that it is so full. Even some of the songs, there's so much going on a lot of times, even in the backgrounds, because a lot of times the vocals are really up front. Mm-hmm. And there's so much going on in the background that a casual listener might listen over, and sometimes there's a lot of layers going on.
Oh yeah.
But this album to me sounds so crisp and so clean. Like that's the one thing about it. It just sounds. That's the only way I think I could really describe it. Is it's just such like a clean album. We've talked about it. I mean, very different, I guess, musician, but we've talked about like, are you experienced? And there's things you can hear on that.
Dirty. Yeah.
It's dirty. And I get, he's using distortion and everything. And I think one of the tracks they even had to label on the, when they sent it to get mastered,
like it's supposed to be
like,
this loud.
Yeah. don't fix the distortion. So yeah, I mean, I get that. But it was also mixed in mono, and done for two reasons. One, because Brian was deaf in one ear. But also Wilson said that he felt that mono mastering, it provided more sonic control over the final mix.
There are a lot of people who feel that way, and I think for that reason, you'll even find remasters of this album, and I think early Beatles stuff too. I think there's a lot more, but these are just a couple examples that come to mind that are specifically remastered in mono.
Yeah, I've noticed that. You can go into record shops and CD stores, or you can even buy like the whole. I mean, you can probably get them on, iTunes and Apple now, but it'll say like mono version, remastered mono.
Yeah,
and it's really interesting. And I always thought, because I know you and I were always like, oh, I want to hear it in stereo. I want to listen in headphones because I want to hear, how they mixed it and panning and instruments here and over. It just.
But the funny thing is
a different experience.
Yeah, I don't even know what that would sound like, because the question that I have would be, aside from the vocals, that you might be able to go back a generation and get the vocals and spread the vocals out a little bit.
Yeah, but if everything's mixed down,
what could you do with all that other stuff? I mean, I don't know that when they recorded that, how they would have done it, because most people will set up. If you're doing like a big thing, like when I used to record those concerts and like symphonic concerts and orchestra stuff in college, there was a pair of really nice microphones that you would place at a specific distance from the stage in very specific specific pattern and angles, so that the perception of the listener was as if you were sitting in the audience. And I don't know if they would have done that in the room of the studio, or it would have just been everything filtered into one track, and it would have sounded amazing, but no stereo image. No, it's not like you're sitting there listening to it, because they did it in stereo, and the guitarist was sitting over here and the piano's on this side of the room. I don't know. Even for as much detail as they got into about the recording, I guess if they would have had a Q&A after, that's what I would have brought up.
Damn.
It's an interesting. You wonder what it could sound like depending on what master tapes are available and how many generations they go back anymore.
All right. Well, I think that this might be a good segue into many people have considered this to be the first like real psychedelic album. And one thing for me, when I listen to music or psychedelic stuff and I'm like, oh, that's trippy or that's cool, the idea of it being in stereo or having it feel like things are moving around in the song, that enhances the experience for me. And personally, I mean, I get that, he was taking LSD and smoking pot and everything when he was kind of writing this, and that had an influence on, his emotions, his feelings, and him expressing that in these songs. But when I listen to the album, and maybe I feel like maybe I'm comparing it to a Crooked Stick, because when I think of a psychedelic album and I compare again this to like Sgt. Pepper, like to me Sgt. Pepper is a psychedelic album. When I listen to that, I'm like, it goes places, and that isn't just kind of maybe about love and things like that. There's more of an experience that goes along with it for me. And that's just my opinion. And that's not to say that, hey, this isn't a psychedelic album. I don't know if you can say it is or it isn't. And maybe it is for some people and maybe it isn't for others.
Well, I could see both sides of that argument for sure. And again, these are just opinions. These aren't facts. For me, I guess you got to think about it, or maybe one way to think about it is maybe not psychedelic in terms of some of these other classic psychedelic albums that but one, what else was out at the time? And what did it sound like compared to their last record? Because I feel like it was out there from what they had done before, and they were experimenting with stuff like echoes, which I mean all they had was echoes and reverb, but they were trying to experiment more, like really exploring the space, you know.
Yep.
And it does have some really kind of dreamy kind of definitely not like straight ahead 60s beach rock band kind of
right.
A lot of parts like that.
Yeah. And again, I feel like when I think of psychedelic music, I'm comparing it to albums, everything that came after this. Like I will say, like a lot of the Beatles stuff, a lot of Pink Floyd stuff, stuff that the Who did. That's, or even like Moody Blues, even for like 60s psychedelic stuff, right? That's kind of what I'm sort of comparing it to. I also, even like I'll take this from kind of like a film or movie perspective. To me, it's kind of like the movie Citizen Kane. Like Citizen Kane was like the first, and they, like some of the techniques, some of the editing, some of the camera shots, just mind blowing. I mean, but you look at them today, or even 5, 10, 15 years after Citizen Kane came out, and it was like, it's kind of normal. And that's where I think a lot of people, when they watch that movie, they're like, I mean, yeah, it's good, but you don't understand. It was like, it paved the way.
Yeah. It's like, I've never done this before.
I've never done this before.
But I think that's one thing you got to think of with this one is, that you wouldn't have the other albums that you referenced probably if this hadn't come first. Yeah. So it is... It's like psychedelic rock, Citizen Kane.
It's basically what it is. Yeah. Well, in 2003 and 2012, Rolling Stone ranked this as the second greatest album of all time, only behind the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper.
Wow. Again, my opinion, but that's a little high for me. I mean, it's like top 10, but man, I don't know. It's an amazing, and see, okay, that brings me to something else, which we talk about this early. What was your intro to this? Do you have any shout outs? Was there somebody who got you hipped on it?
I mean, my dad definitely, I remember him having this album. I remember him playing it. I definitely knew the songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice and God Only Knows.
Yeah.
I remember the song, it's really interesting. The song I actually specifically remember him playing is the song Pet Sounds.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm not sure why, but I remember him playing it for me.
That's
and
really
being like, wow. Yeah. I mean, he has it on vinyl, he has it on CD, and I don't think I own it in any other format other than just, online. But yeah, that was my intro to it. What about you?
Well, I mean, I was quite familiar with the Beach Boys stuff, but the hits. I mean,
yeah.
As I got my respective family members' vinyl collections as I got older, I don't remember either my dad or my uncle, whose collections I got, having this record. I remember being told about it in high school. Mr. Toby Schuler told me about it. And I may have like borrowed it or listened to it somehow at the time.
Yeah.
But it didn't. I guess I'd always known about it, but I guess it wasn't until several years ago. I talk a lot with my neighbor, Mike Walton, about music. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about some of the greatest albums, and he brought this up. And I was like, man, I really need to like get into this. So again, having known a fair amount of the songs on it, I don't think it was until a couple years ago that I really dove into it. And then of course, after listening to it, you're kind of fascinated with it.
You get immersed. Yeah.
Just due like to, I don't want to say folklore, but just due to the folklore of it, if you will, like the stories behind it about it influencing this and this influencing that. And so I really got into it then. And then, of course, after that, once I saw that you could watch the documentary on it, I'm a sucker for music documentaries.
Sure.
Even for bands that I'm not a lifelong expert on. So.
No. Yeah. Depeche Mode. So I think we've definitely given a lot of background on this album, but I think it's important that it's not just your basic run of the mill album, and that's why we wanted to spend a little more time on it. So if you've made it this far, I think it's about time we kind of get into the tracks. What do you say there,
man?
Tim?
After close to 40 minutes, dude. Yeah, I think it's time.
I think we should. So side one starts off, Wouldn't It Be Nice? I think a phenomenal way to start an album. This is one of their most popular songs. I think anybody who's heard it, or you'd be like, oh, I've heard that song, I know it.
I'm always just really like how it starts out with that harp. It's pretty cool. It's a really to me, that is totally unique, and I can't think of another song that starts and then just a big drum hit. Yeah, and then everybody goes in and the song just kicks off. And I found it interesting. This was actually the third single from the album. I forget what the other ones. The first, Caroline No, I believe, is the first, and then I forget and then John Sloop B is the second. Yeah, that was the first single.
Yep.
Wow, they were doing some acid.
I know.
Dude. Okay, so I got to get into this real quick. So there were some leftovers from this album, right? Some stuff that didn't make the album.
Yeah, and I know what you're gonna say.
You want to explain to me how the hell Good Vibrations didn't make the fucking album?
Dude.
And Caroline No was the first single? Like, are you shitting me?
I mean, I don't want to get into scratches or anything yet, but let's just say you could swap Good Vibrations with about half the songs on this album.
Fuck.
And could you imagine? I mean, I'll tell you what, you put Good Vibrations on this album, and if you didn't think it earned number 2 on the Rolling Stones, you put Good Vibrations on this album, it definitely, I think, earns number 2 for Rolling Stone greatest albums all time. Like, it takes it up a lot, because that song is just
note on you. Jeez, or even Sloop John B forgot. Shit, okay, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways.
Again, I wasn't there. I don't know, but I know that those songs are better than that one.
Yeah. Sorry. So, anyways, let's continue. So Wouldn't It Be Nice? I mean, amazing song. It's awesome. I love the opening words. Wouldn't it be nice? If we were older, then we wouldn't have to wait so long. I find that always so funny too, because when you're younger, you always want to be older because that means you can do more shit, right?
Yeah.
But then when you get older, you're like, oh man, I wish I was younger. You kind of complain. Nice, you start to complain.
Go to college again.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Just relive that. Save some brain cells. Anyways, phenomenal song. Yeah. Most people know it, but it's basically it's a song about. I consider it kind of like a lover's daydream and like what the future could hold.
Yeah, absolutely.
With all these possibilities of.
I think it's a perfect way to say it.
Yeah. Second song, You Believe in Me. And I guess the intro, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but the intro is like plucking piano strings with a bobby pin.
That makes sense. I was going to actually say it sounded to me like it was almost like a hammered dulcimer. But that makes sense. Plucking the piano strings. Okay. With a bobby pin.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's a neat idea. And again, I wouldn't have known that until
you met me. But basically with this,
after 30 years, because you didn't know that shit in second grade.
Actually, I probably didn't know that until like last week. But basically what this song is it's Wilson's kind of admission to his wife, Marilyn, at the time, just saying, look, I haven't been perfect. I know I haven't been perfect. I haven't treated you always the right way, but you're still by my side. So there are some times during the song where I feel like when he sings, I think it's when he sings like Every Time We Break Up, I feel like his voice maybe slightly gets out of range, or it's definitely pushing it. There's something that feels
almost going to break up.
Yeah. Like it almost doesn't fit, but dude, the harmonies on the song.
Yeah,
I mean, dude,
I know.
Beach Boys harmonies, it's just insane.
Tough
They
to
are
beat 'em.
so good.
Yeah.
Sound so clean.
It's like every
there's-
time I hear it, I'm like, man, I wish I could sing like that.
Yeah, right. Me too. Because then I wouldn't be here doing this podcast. No, I'm just kidding. But then I think at the end or at some point in the song, and maybe you picked up on this, there's, I don't know if it's a piano or a tack piano or there's a harpsichord on it, but there's something that I heard, and I think it's kind of like right at the end, and it only comes in for like a little bit. So I'm not sure if it's something you picked up on, but I was curious if you know what that was, and it's okay if you don't, because
I don't offhand, but there's is the plucking of the strings with a bobby pin, is that just for the intro? Because I'm wondering if they just kind of kept with that theme, because
they could have.
That would have a similar, that metal on metal sound is what makes a tack piano a tack piano, and a bobby pin and a piano string would definitely give you that as well.
Because I know they did use the tack piano on this album, and I believe they used the harpsichord as well. Did they?
Probably.
I think they did. Yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you?
Yeah,
it's a harpsichord. So
those ones are tough. Those are tough to pull off in rock. I mean, Hendrix pulled it off with an electric harpsichord in The Burning of the Midnight Lamp, I think it is.
Yeah, he did.
But other than that, they're kind of tough. Then the clavinet came about and shit got funky. But anyways, so you still believe in me?
Yes, I still do.
Oh, sorry, that's not me. There's a lot of me in here. It's almost really selfish.
Yeah, it is.
No, but that's not me. I think it's funny because when you were talking about like the psychedelic portion, I feel like this track lyrically to me more than any of the other ones kind of goes into that, because it's like talking about changes, and I've kind of started to become like this, or kind of started to become like that, but I realize that's not who I am.
Yeah, you have those introspective moments where you have some that real self-realization. Yeah. And he says at the end, I soon found out that my lonely life wasn't so pretty. Like, it's not, just looking back on the past, and it's not that great. But again, the song is just beautifully sung, and background vocals are great, as you would expect. Mm-hmm. Fourth song on side one, Don't Talk, in quotes, put your head on my shoulder.
Now,
or in quotes, parens, yeah.
To me, this is like the continuation of You Still Believe in Me, because it's like you've made this admission, you've made this statement, and then it's just like it's okay.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I found interesting about this song is, and I think, I'm not sure if it's in the book or where they talk about it's not necessary. It's not about talking back and forth or having a discussion or having talking love. It's more about nonverbal communication between lovers. It's about the actions they're taking. And at this point, I think all the words have been said, or there are no words at this point. Like you beat that horse to death. And, and even from a musical perspective, this is, I think, one of those songs where I feel like there's a lot of layers in the background. Like you have the vocals up front, as you would expect, but then behind there's so many layers and so many things going on. It just has this really, really great depth to it.
Yep. Well, the string, it is kind of really, with the strings in the back and everything, it is kind of, I guess musically, it's like, it's saying musically really what the lyrics are, because there aren't a whole lot of words in it. Sure. I mean, it's not a real wordy song, so to speak. And it's funny you bring that up. It really, word painting in like the best way.
It's like painting with numbers, but with words. If that makes sense. Yeah. Anyways, so fifth track is I'm Waiting for the Day. And it's cool. It's got that drum intro, but then it's like this pulsing keyboard that comes in. Yeah. And I just thought that was really cool, but it's
and I really like the timpani hits. Like they have those big timpani hits, and that's really cool.
They do. but the main kind of theme, again, this album is a lot about love, and about Brian Wilson's, and Tony Asher helped, he contributed to it as well, but his struggle with love and also kind of loneliness, and a lot of things that he went through, not only with his current relationship, I think in previous relationships and whatnot, but this is really a song about basically about a guy who's in love or wants to be with a girl, and she's not ready for the relationship yet. So raise your hand if you've ever been there.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. And
is this the one? I think is. Did you think? Like it's basically saying, did you think I would just turn around and let this go, or something? I can't think of the exact lyrics, but I feel like
I can look them up quick.
I feel like it's that one.
I think it happens. So yeah. So what happens is it's much slower throughout, kind of like the beginning of the song, and then right at the end it transitions. It has a really good transition, and then
that's where you get those big timpani hits, man.
Yeah, you didn't think I could sit around and let him work. You didn't think I could sit around and let him watch him take you. Yeah. So yeah, you're right.
That's it.
You're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Number 6 is there are 2 instrumental songs on this album. This is side 1's instrumental, and it's Let's Go Away for a While. So there's a lot of instrumentation. So I guess they use 12 violins, a piano, 4 saxophones, an oboe, vibraphones, and a Coca-Cola bottle that was used for the slide guitar.
Now I like that because a lot of people do some interesting things with slides, especially if you're in a pinch and you can't find something. I have used a socket before, a beer bottle.
I used to do that.
A Bic lighter's a good one too. The big Bic, you need the big one because you need that surface area, not the little ones. But I do think that's funny that they specifically mention that, because people will do that all the time if you can't find something.
Yeah. So to me, the song, I enjoy it. It has like a real kind of dreamy feeling. I kind of equate it to me. I feel like, it's like I'm sitting, in a chair looking out the window on a rainy day or something.
Yeah.
Last track on side 1, homie.
Dude, Sloop, John B. And I didn't know this, but it makes sense when you listen to the lyrics that it was a traditional folk song that was popular in like the
Trio.
Bahamas, I believe. I believe they say it's from the Nassau area, Nassau in the Bahamas.
Yeah. But it was originally by the Kingston Trio, right? Like it's a cover,
it's a traditional song. I believe it's a traditional folk song, but the Kingston Trio were, I believe, the first like American group that really popularized in any way a recording of it. And I think the Kingston Trio, they need a shout out, because they're like one of those. My dad really did like the Kingston Trio, and I have some of their records, and I think that groups like that are kind of the forerunner to the Beach Boys in many ways, with the harmonies and how tight they are together. Sure. So anyways, obviously they had enough of an influence on them where they knew this recording and then did a cover of it. But Wilson's arrangement of it is incredible, and I really like this song. I kind of don't understand all the lyrics. They're a little weird to me at times, where he's like talking about somebody came and ate a ball of my corn.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's all like it's about being at sea, or so it's probably written in a vernacular that's far from what we would use today, and about a lifestyle that we also know nothing about. But instrumentation, I love it, and
I like it as well, because it's one of the more upbeat songs on the album. This album does have a real somber kind of feel to a lot of the songs, and I really dig it. But I believe this song was actually one of the first recorded for. It was just recorded. And Brian Wilson appeased Capitol Records. They wanted a song. They were like, we need a song that sounds like a single. And so they ended up putting this on there. And this was actually the second single that was released for this album. So Let's flip it.
Well, hold on though. I do want to.
Oh.
He changed. A lot of people felt like this was a nod to the psychedelic stuff because I think the original lyrics were, "This is the worst trip since I've been born," and he said, "This is the worst trip I've ever been on."
Yep.
Which inspired a very great song on an album that we will talk about in the future, which is "We All Belong" by Dr. Dog. And the album, or the name of that song, is "The Worst Trip," and the tagline is this the worst trip you've ever been on?" It's like it's such a great homage to this song in totally. How it sounds and what it says. But
that's cool. Note. It's cool. Side note. All right, flip it. Flip
dude. God only knows.
He, you know what? Oh, I shouldn't say he. God does. I mean, who's to say what God is? So.
Honestly, it should be beyond gender at that point. If you're creating existence as we know it, I would tend to think it's probably beyond that. But anyways, I think McCartney's right in his assessment of it as being like the perfect song. I think the chord changes just it strikes me every time I hear it how good it is.
It's for not being a musician and knowing anything about chord changes, it's an amazing song. It's one that a lot of people would know. Are those like the one thing that stood out to me when I listened to it again most recently? Are those like sleigh bells? I feel like they almost like drive throughout the song, and it's
I don't know. I'd have to look more into that or give it a closer listen. But there's something there. I know what you mean. There's something in there that's driving it like that. But this was one of those lyrics that I have to imagine the band debated on because they specifically reference it. I think Tony Asher talks about it, the whole thing about "I may not always love you, but as long as there are stars above you." And I think people could take that weird, but I think they meant it as like, someday I'm not going to be here. Yeah. Is how I take that. But
it's here on Earth.
yeah, sure. But that's how I've always taken that lyric.
Yeah, well, he says you never need to doubt it.
Yeah,
I'll make you so sure about it. Yes, we could let's just sing the whole song.
I don't think we're gonna do it as good as Carl.
Probably not. And that's only because there's like a delay between us and
yeah. Now we know what Jagger and Bowie were going through with that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, moving on, number 2. I know there's an answer.
Yeah,
I know. There's an answer.
Yeah, so we were talking about this earlier. It threw me off because I was like, well, wait, where's "Hang On to Your Ego"? But that was the original one, and I think that. I believe Mike Love had a real problem with that lyric because he was very much opposed to drugs and the fact that Wilson was experimenting with that. And I believe that it came out that "Hang On to Your Ego" was about like a big acid trip and that Mike Love didn't want anything to do
nothing
with it.
To do with it. Yeah, he really did. He just didn't want to be associated with that culture. And again, not to, drop it on Mike Love here, but I think one of his biggest hangups was he was like, hey, we've been doing this. It's working. The formula is working. He didn't see a need to change unless there was an actual need to change.
Yeah.
He wanted it. To him, it hadn't gotten stale yet. It hadn't got stale for the fans yet. But Brian was just like, no, we can do better. So,
but that's why, I don't want to go in too much into it, but I mean, that's where you could certainly put Brian Wilson up there as like a true artist. Totally. Who wants to do something different and push boundaries as opposed to saying, well, this works, so let's just write 20 more albums about girls, cars, and surfing.
Yes, let's do that.
But
at least they found their niche.
Yeah.
All right. Song 3, side 2.
Shit.
No. Here Today.
Yep.
It's interesting because it's kind of about a guy I feel like almost warning the next guy
Yeah.
about what this this woman did to him.
Yeah.
And I that's just weird. I don't know if I've ever warned anybody, but
No.
yeah, it's there's a sequence in it that actually, and this has nothing to do with Pet Sounds. In fact, I could be crazy and people might think I'm on acid, but there is a sequence in this song. If you listen to it and then you watch the intro to Goonies during the credit sequence, while I think it's the Corellis, aren't the Corellis? And there is like, whatever the music is playing there, I found real similarities. I didn't go back and watch it, but in my head, like the opening credit sequence in this song, I feel like there's similarities. Just saying. Yep.
Holy shit, dude. I'm having a Scanners moment right now.
That's a deep dive. It's a deep dive.
Whoa. That's amazing. I mean, dude, it's stuff like that, prompted Pink Floyd to watch The Wizard of Oz and then construct an album that went with it exactly.
Did they really do that?
Fuck no, they didn't. No. It's just weird how it goes together. Just like the same way that, assuming even if it had been out, Brian Wilson probably wasn't watching the opening sequence to Goonies.
No, probably not. Anyways, it's a good song. Listen to it.
I can't wait to do this.
Do the comparison. So, number 4, I wasn't made for these times. Oh my God. Love it, dude. The perfect song. Again, everybody's been there. It's just about, you don't feel like you fit in, man.
Yeah. And here's your harpsichord and tack piano on this one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Along just with like a lot of other things.
If our podcast doesn't make it, I think this song needs to be our anthem. We were just ahead of our time. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. So,
and one thing that I'd like to talk about in far as instrumentation is I don't know how much this had made it into like real popular music prior to this, but somebody's playing the Electro Theremin on this.
I was going to ask you about
Paul
that.
Tanner.
Okay.
So the theremin itself was an instrument that you it's the only instrument you play without touching, because it senses. It's got 2 metal antennae and plural antennae.
Sure.
So one of them that goes up and down and it controls pitch, and one of them goes out horizontally and that controls the volume. So you're controlling your volume with your proximity of this hand and your pitch with this hand. So to watch somebody play it is something. And if you ever get a chance, watch these videos of this woman called Clara Rockmore play it, because she could make that thing sound like the fucking human voice. I mean, it's amazing. But this is that same sound, but what they did is somehow they boxed it up in the Electro Theremin, and they have a knob, and so like the person is using the knob to change the pitch. There's probably a little more of a feeling of control, because I'm sure you could put notches on there for like, at this point you're going to hit F sharp or whatever it is. But that was a pretty early use of that. And that same instrument is like front and center in Good Vibrations,
Yeah. Dude, such a trippy sound.
I know.
So this is interesting, because this is one of those songs it's actually not about love. It's more about not fitting in. And I feel like it's almost a cry for help. And this is one of those songs where, let's just say Brian Wilson would have perhaps, passed away from like an overdose or suicide. This is one of those songs that people would look back on and be like, oh, well, I can totally see it now. It makes so much sense.
Oh, sure.
Just like people do with, a lot of musicians that's happened to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like this is one of those songs, and where it could almost be like a kind of like a cry for help. But
yeah, sure.
Then we move on to the self-titled track, Pet Sounds, which, dude, I'm sure you've seen this and are checking it out. Originally, it was called Run James Run, because Brian Wilson made it, and he made it and he thought it could be used for a James Bond movie.
Yep.
And it would be interesting. It has an interesting sound. Once they didn't want to use it for a James Bond movie. He put it on this album.
Well, yeah, I just I feel like it doesn't have enough of a spy sound, you know.
Yeah, I feel like they could have, but
they could have used it in a love scene, maybe. Or, you know, maybe when he's like walking into MI6 and Q's like gonna outfit him with an Aston Martin that shoots missiles and shit.
Could have done it that way. What is that sound? Is that just like is that just a guitar? Like that is just stands out. I've never heard a sound on a guitar like that before. It just sounds so unique.
But I think that they're just using, you know, a lot of reverb, which it's all spring reverb, and that has a very surfy kind of sound. And I think in those days you had vibrato in there too, so you can just adjust the intensity of the vibrato and the speed. So I think that's kind of what's giving it that sound.
Okay. Well, it's really unique, and I think it's just an interesting, you know, if you're going to have an instrumental, have it stand out and be interesting, and this one is. So
yeah, agreed.
Then we go to the last song in the album, which was the first single off the album. Again, we have a hard time believing that, and that is Caroline, No.
Yeah.
And I thought it was funny. Originally, Tony Asher had the title is Caroline. Carol,
I know.
And Brian Wilson thought it was Caroline, I know.
Yeah.
Instead of Carol, I know. Caroline, I know.
Yeah.
But Asher went with the Caroline, no, because he just thought it was more interesting. And it's definitely more of a I think it's more of a somber song. I don't know.
It'd be a good mid-trip one.
Yeah. Brian Wilson, he said he considered it was actually, I don't know if this holds true today, but he considered it at that point to be the best song he'd ever written. So that might explain why he wanted it to be the first single off the album.
How could... I don't know.
But also, there's got to be a radio edit, because at the end of this song, it goes, I think it goes silent, and then there's dogs barking, and then the train comes in, and it sounds like you hear the gates come down, and they're like at an intersection.
Yeah, Fetch the Bolt Cutters had some influence there with the dogs barking.
I know, right? And more. But then at the end, they kind of bring in that short little sample from "Wouldn't It Be Nice Again," and that just kind of ends the album. So it kind of comes full circle.
I think that's
I love it.
That's a good wrap up.
Yeah.
Some good packaging.
Speaking of wrapping it up, Grim, we're running long on this one. Damn.
Well, it's a big album.
Sorry, not sorry. Yeah, you'll thank us one day.
Well, then, dude,
Fetch the Bolt Cutters, homie.
Yeah, let's fetch him. I'm actually gonna put the ball in the tee and just set it at the right height for you here, because I believe I had to go first last time.
All right, fine. I don't even know if that's true. You just want to go to overtime. All right.
It might not be what you think.
Okay, so I'm gonna go with side 1, track 2. You Still Believe in Me. I like the message of it, and I think it's I think it's great, but the song itself, again, for everyone watching and listening, it's not that I hate the song, it's not that I don't like the song. This is one of the greatest albums of all time. It's just you have to pick one.
Game.
And this is the one. It's a game. You think this? Yeah. And
yeah,
so
I know DMX would say otherwise, but
yes,
this is a game.
But for me, especially with songs following that of especially like Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder, which I think explore maybe some similar themes. I don't know. I could do without it. So that's mine. Yep. Go for it.
Well, not going to be the Islanders and the Capitals today there, dude, because I'm not going to talk or put my head on your shoulder. I'm going to scratch.
What?
Don't talk, put your head on my shoulder.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's just one of those ones, like, I get it. I do also appreciate the sentiment, and it's kind of, it's okay, but it just, it kind of just drags for me. And if I could easily go from That's Not Me to I'm Waiting for a Day, and to me have a similar effect, because you still kind of slow down before the end of that song when you know, when it really
that part
jumps up.
Jump.
Yeah.
Speaking of jump.
Sometimes all you need is just to give them a nice little shove.
Yeah, that's right. Just tell them. All right. Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you so much for playing. Please let us know what track you would scratch down below. Like, subscribe, and remember, it's just a game, okay?
Suggest, please, by all means, suggest other albums. We don't claim to be experts, but a lot of this is to get people into something they wouldn't have listened to otherwise. It's certainly done that for us.
Yeah, the only thing we really claim is that we listen to music, we listen to the album, and we're going to talk about it. So,
and we listen to albums for what they are.
Yes, exactly. So, take care, everyone. I'm glad you listened to our disclaimer, because don't jump ever. Okay.
Scratch you later.
Scratch a Track is produced by the Dude and Grim. Additional music provided by More. That's ... MORE, and the Tims, TIMNZ. Copyright 2020. The Dude and Grim Show.